Hello and welcome to Close Reading Classic Literature with me, Dr. Octavia Cox. It is a truth universally acknowledged that Jane Austen was a lover of irony, and today I'm going to consider the irony of the famous opening lines of Jane Austen's novel Pride and Prejudice. So what are the ironies? What are the jokes? What can we learn from the novel's opening couple of sentences? So let's get straight to the text. Here is the opening of Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice. The famous lines. It is a truth universally acknowledged that a single man in possession of a good fortune must be in want of a wife. However little known the feelings or views of such a man may be on his first entering a neighbourhood, this truth is so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families that he is considered as the rightful property of some one or other of their daughters. The first thing we might think about this opening statement, given its tone, is that it is really rather a silly thing to proclaim. After all, not all single men want wives, surely. This sense of absurdity is encouraged by the over-the-top diction. A truth is a truth. To state that a truth is universally acknowledged is to over-egg the pudding. We might also note, though, that the word acknowledged establishes the importance of accepting or acknowledging the truth, which, of course, is one of the cruxes of the novel that will follow. Both Lizzie and Darcy have to acknowledge truths about themselves in particular, however uncomfortable they may be to accept at first. So right from the beginning, we've got the play between truth and knowledge. There are truths, and then there's acknowledging truth, or there's knowing truth, or there's having an acceptance. We might also ask ourselves the question, from whose perspective is the opening sentence taken? Are we being led into the minds, the perspective of characters we are about to meet? So through free and direct discourse, which is a technique that I've spoken about elsewhere on my channel, but if you're interested after this one, do go and watch some of those videos about what free and direct discourse is. But very quickly, it's when the narrative voice in the third person moves into the language, the perspective, the idiom, the thoughts, etc. of one or more characters, or a group of characters perhaps, or an individual character. So here, perhaps this opening statement is the narrative voice moving into the minds or the position or the general groupthink of a character or set of characters. So is this the view of Meryton? Is this the view of people within Meryton, like Mrs. Bennet? Or is this in fact the particular view of Mrs. Bennet as an individual? Or even perhaps someone like Charlotte Lucas? So are we encouraged then to treat this opening sentence, the hyperbole of this opening sentence, wryly? And I would say that overstatement is always something to be wary of in Austen, although, boom, boom, that is itself, of course, a slight overstatement. But Austen, generally speaking, does operate far more in understatement, in a kind of ironic understatement, or even litotes, than she does in overstatement. And overstatement is usually mocked in Austen. So it's interesting to pay attention here to the fact that we have a very overblown overstatement in this opening famous line. A truth universally acknowledged is definitely an overstatement. So why does Austen do that here when so often she operates in understatement? Even though the tone is apparently light-hearted, what this opening does show sincerely, I think, is the claustrophobic, marriage-centric environment within small market towns such as Meryton in the period that Austen was writing. And there are a couple of points that I want to flesh out about Austen's pointed social commentary through her ironic tone in just these opening couple of lines. The first is about the use of the word property. He considered as the rightful property some one or other of their daughters. Austen plays with expected gender differences in her use of the term rightful property. It is a rather grim irony, even if expressed lightly here by Austen, or apparently lightly at least. The word property was a very important word in relation to women and marriage in the early 19th century. And the expression that such a man is considered as the rightful property of the neighbourhood's daughters, Austen ironically plays on the law, on the convention of coverture, which was in operation at the time that Austen was living and writing. Indeed, a Regency period wife was essentially the property of her husband. She was not a separate, independent person, legally speaking. Samuel Johnson, in his Dictionary of the English Language, first published in 1755, defines coverture as, in law, the estate and condition of a married woman who, by the laws of our realm, is in potestate viri, which translates as by the power of men. The rules of coverture meant that a wife was not legally an individual person. She was subsumed officially into that of her husband. And furthermore, a woman's property, so her money, her chattels, her goods, even her clothes, became her husband's at the moment of marriage. Legally speaking, a woman was in a much, much better position as a single female, so in the kind of legalese, a femme sole, than as a wife, a femme covert, which is where we get coverture from. So Barbara Bodichon later helpfully outlines the position in her brief summary in plain language of the most important laws concerning women, and this was published in 1854. So a while after Austen was living, but still relevant for helping us understand the laws concerning women in the 19th century. So on the left are her sort of notes, and then on the right is a fuller explication. Married women, no legal existence. A man and wife are one person in law. The wife loses all her rights as a single woman, and her existence is entirely absorbed in that of her husband. He is civilly responsible for her acts. She lives under his protection or cover, and her condition is called coverture. A husband has a right to the person of his wife. A woman's body belongs to her husband. She is in his custody, and he can enforce his right by a writ of habeas corpus, so a suspension of the body. So a husband has a right to the body of his wife. So if his wife earns any money with her hands, or with her intellect or whatever, earns any money during their marriage, he has a legal right to that money because she has earned it from her body. Also, of course, that means that a husband has certain conjugal rights also, and that's enforced by the law. Those are conjugal rights. Remember, a husband has a right to the person of his wife. Her personal property becomes his. So what was her personal property before marriage, such as money in hand, money at the bank, jewels, household goods, clothes, etc., becomes absolutely her husband's, and he may assign or dispose of them at his pleasure, whether he and his wife live together or not. So even if you are separated from your husband, he still has a right to his wife's personal property. And there are many cases of that. If you're interested, then you might want to look up the relationship between Charlotte Smith and her husband. Charlotte Smith was a very prominent poetess and novelist in the Romantic period, in the period that Jane Austen was living and writing, and it will make your hair stand on end, the legal position that she was in, particularly that she left her husband, who had treated her very poorly. In order to survive, she wrote her poems, particularly elegiac sonnets that were first published in 1784. And they went through many, many, many editions. They were very popular, they were very influential on key romantic figures. And her husband would turn up even though they were separated, her husband would turn up at the publisher and demand the money that Charlotte Smith had made from her writing, and he was legally entitled to do that. But that was a sidetrack. So the point that I'm trying to make is that how the husband wielded his almost total authority and protection would obviously vary immensely, but it is one of the reasons why the relationships in Austen's novels between the heroes and their female, particularly dependents, but any dependents, so any person who a hero has duties towards, that those relationships are worth noting. So, for example, Mr. Darcy in his relationship with his female dependent sister, Georgiana, he treats her well, even though he is in, a position of high power over her, and that's good. Whereas somebody like John Dashwood, who doesn't, in Sense and Sensibility, who doesn't treat his sisters very well at all, his sort of dependent sisters, Eleanor and Marianne, that exposes his unheroicalness. And so these are good signs for a heroine looking out for a potential husband, is how does he treat his female dependents? Darcy treats his sister very well and sympathetically and kindly. Given what her behaviour with Wickham, in a different family perhaps, she would be treated very differently, but Darcy is sympathetic towards his sister and really looks after her. And also Lizzie, when she goes to Pemberley, she hears from Mrs. Reynolds, who's the housekeeper, about how good he is taking care of those people who are sort of financially dependent on him, on Mr. Darcy. And that's a good sign that he will treat his wife well and that he won't abuse his position of power when they get married, and he is, she has no legal identity. And equally, men who don't treat their female dependents or people who are dependent on them very well, that is a sign that they are not a good choice as a hero, shall we say. But getting back to Austen's quotation then, Austen ironically flips expected gender roles in her use of the phrase rightful property. Upon marriage, a woman became the rightful property of her husband in terms of the law, in terms of legal rights. And Austen puns on the double meaning of the word right. A legal right, an entitlement, and the moral right, right as opposed to wrong. And she brings them together through punning, and so asks readers to think about the moral rights and wrongs of the legal rights of property laws regarding marriage and women. Within the opening couple of sentences of Pride and Prejudice, we are presented with analysis of society's anxiety over marriage, particularly for women. And Austen satirises the behaviour of families seeking marriage in the acknowledgement that, however little known the feelings or views of such a man may be, he is still eligible for some one or other of a neighbourhood's daughters. And so hardly a ringing endorsement. It is not a good idea, given the laws of coverture that I have just been describing, to marry a man of little known feelings and views. The way that Jane Austen uses the idea of truth in this opening suggests the delusion, even self-delusion, that is created and encouraged by the anxiety about the apparent need for marriage. And note the use of the modal verb must. A single man must want a wife. Who is making the judgment that it must be so? The tone is different from a statement of fact. So, for example, a single man in possession of a good fortune is in want of a wife, is different in tone. Must be is a belief. So whose belief is this? And of course, this concept of belief is comically at odds with the certainty of universal truth. So grammatically, you can say that the sentence almost undermines itself. The content is also undermined in the way that we move from the hyperbolic truth universally acknowledged to the notion of a particular truth being only well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families. So we move from universal to local. And the words fixed in the minds does not necessarily suggest a truth so much as a belief. If something is fixed in the minds, it's something that you believe. Perhaps it suggests a kind of self-delusion, but it also suggests how fixed the idea of marriage is into the minds of communities such as that of Meryton. The movement from the universal to the particular is mirrored in the form of the whole chapter. We move from a narrative voice, however trustworthy we may or may not consider that voice to be, but we move from this narrative voice talking of truths universally acknowledged into the rest of the chapter, which consists almost exclusively of a dialogue between one couple, Mr. and Mrs. Bennet, discussing this very point and, ironically, not agreeing. Mr. Bennet, for example, teases Mrs. Bennet with the question of the wealthy and single Mr. Bingley marrying one of their daughters. He says, "Is that his design in settling here? Must be in want of a wife." Well, is that his design in settling here? Although, also, we might note that for all his teasing of his wife, Mr. Bennet does actually ask Mrs. Bennet of Mr. Bingley, is he married or single? So he also, like everyone else in the neighbourhood, is interested in the eligibility of the newly arrived young man of large fortune, as Mrs. Bennet calls him. So we move from truth universally acknowledged in the first sentence to truth so well fixed in the minds of the surrounding families in the second. And what does this shift set up for the rest of the novel in terms of ideas about facts and beliefs and hopes, etc.? Well, perhaps the shift suggests ways that group thinking can easily slip from some of us think X, or even only I think X, to all of us must surely think X. And I've spoken about that before, the idea of groupthink, in the introduction of Mr. Darcy slightly later in the novel. The way that the individual can sort of universalise their thinking and project it into a certain kind of group thinking, and how that's presented to us very sort of deftly and interestingly in the novel Pride and Prejudice. So this idea of going from, well, I think X or we think X to, well, every right-thinking person surely will think X. And here, arguably, the thinking of a neighbourhood is extending to become surely a view shared universally. It might perhaps set us up to encounter Lizzie Bennet's way of thinking, who has to learn, of course, the difference between truth and opinion or belief. And that's one of the kind of central hearts of the novel, that Lizzie has to do this self-discovery, this learning, and avoid the tendency to kind of universalise in the way that Meryton, this environment that she has grown up in, has kind of encouraged her to learn how to think. So there are several ways in which the ironical tone of the opening sentences of Pride and Prejudice undermine the ideas presented within them. However, while women such as Mrs. Bennet might project such an idea onto a single man, that he must want a wife, it should not be forgotten that single men in possession of good fortunes were indeed looking to make eligible matches too. A wife, after all, was required in order to pass on that good fortune legitimately to an heir. So a single man who wanted an heir would be in want of a wife of some kind to pass down that fortune. So Mr. Collins, for example, who is a single man of good prospects, financially if not personally, even states in his proposal to Lizzie Bennet, because he is such a romantic. He states in his proposal that he came into Hertfordshire with the design of selecting a wife. And Lizzie Bennet, after Jane Bennet, was the one that he happened to select. It's quite sort of depersonalised language. He came into Hertfordshire with the design of selecting a wife because that was what was needed in order to pass on that property. There is also, however, a greater level of irony working here. There is an arena in which such a truth is universally acknowledged. Something more metafictional, that is, Regency novels. So I think there is an ironic nod to novelistic convention. Within the sphere of almost all late 18th and early 19th century novels, especially those written by women, the rich hero does indeed marry the worthy heroine, as ultimately happens, of course, within the novel Pride and Prejudice itself. Indeed, irony of ironies, ultimately all the eligible single men who constitute a significant character who come into the neighbourhood, Darcy, Bingley, Collins, do end up married by the novel's end, and furthermore married to one of the neighbourhood's daughters. Lizzie, Jane, Charlotte. Ultimately, ironically, Pride and Prejudice has perpetuated the myth, or the truth universally acknowledged, that a single man in possession of a good fortune does want a wife. In this opening then, Jane Austen is laughing at herself by ironising her own novel's story. Thank you very much indeed for watching. Remember, if you like what I do here on my channel where I analyse classic literature, then do subscribe. And if you have liked the video, then please do press the thumbs up button. It helps me out in YouTube's algorithm. And what do you think? Do you have any other thoughts about these opening couple of lines? What strikes you about what's going on and how Austen is playing with the role of women and marriage and truths universally acknowledged? Do leave your thoughts in the comments below.